Hello, and welcome to another episode of the VtES podcast, where we talk about all things related to Vampire the Eternal Struggle. Today, we have with us three other very special guests from the finals table of the recent Australia-New Zealand Continental Championships. And let's get to it. And no preamble today. Let's just get the guests to introduce themselves. All right, hey guys, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, great to be here.
A delight.
Before we start the roundtable, I'd just like to make a quick shout out and special thanks to Steve Harris for organizing the tournament that we've just all been in, and also Andy from Median Gaming for graciously hosting or allowing us to play at his place. So thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, Andy. And just quick introduction. This before you are the 5-1 finalists from the, I think officially it's the Continental Championships. But anyway.
I think Key has now won enough times between him and Simon that it might become the New Zealand Australian Continental Championships now.
Yeah, I didn't want to raise that. I'm glad somebody did that.
Yeah, so with us today we have Stu, Key, Craig, who's hiding behind I have no camera, and unfortunately Shan won't be able to join us today as he's traveling, but he has kindly provided us with some of his thoughts about what happened during the finals table.
So he's not allowed on the table on this one.
Yep. So if you're keen to, if you, the viewer at home, is keen to have a look at what went down during the final table, I'll put the link in the description below. That's not on my channel. That's hosted on Andy's channel over at Median Gaming. But do check it out. And also we have, I think it was Ben, John, and Keith on commentary for that game.
Great commentary. They did a great job.
Apparently there was a #Handshakegate, which we will talk about in a little bit. But anyway, let's get into the meat of it. So again, thanks guys for coming on to this roundtable. Just quick introductions of yourself and also what the deck you were running in, like, I guess 3 to 4 sentences.
So I'm Stu. I was seed, technically 5th and 6th. I was tied, and it was literally a coin toss between me and someone else to see whether or not I'd end up on the finals table. I was playing a Group 2 Giovanni deck with a smattering of shambling hordes, so that 10 in a deck. Not enough as it turned out to be.
So I was Key. I was playing a Bali Barons deck, so Arishat was the star vampire, and then pretty much all the other vampires were 6-cap barons, Anak barons with Obfuscate and Presence. Used Condemnation Mute for vote control and also attrition, minion control, and it didn't bleed. Like, it voted. That's bleeding was the exception. Like, the part of the deck strategy is to not bleed. I went into the final with 3rd seed, which was, yes, really good seeding wise. Being able to pick makes a big difference.
I intended to play a Harbinger Stickman deck, and I accidentally grabbed the wrong box. So I found myself with 4 old decks that were only partially built. And so I ran with the best of those that I could. So I pulled cards out of the other 3 decks and made refurbished a Milk Anti straight up bleed deck, whose only bit of jank is that it runs 6 Southerns, 2 Washers, and not many normal masters. The normal masters run to a couple of Gambit Accepteds.
Shan, who's unfortunately not able to join us today, was playing a old school Group 2-3 Chaosid kind of stealth bleedy, but more toolboxy with a little bit of transient intercept, small combat package around Arms of the Beast, and of sorts with the Cheeky Entombment lying floating around. And otherwise, well, his plan was to govern our vampires, play at stealth, deflect, and get his pool and VPs that way. So I think he got into the finals as second seed, I believe. Yeah. Yeah.
And then it looks like he got totally boned in his crypt selection because he definitely wasn't governing down in that final.
Yeah, he did mention it in his written sort of thoughts that yeah, it came up, that problem did come up a little bit. Yep, so before we get into the actual... Oh, sorry, I forgot my own stuff. So for once, I'm not just the host, I'm actually involved in this. So I was the fourth seed going into the finals, and I was also playing a Chaos Seed deck, but I was playing group 5-6 with, I think there was like a cheeky La Sombra in there or something similar, but not quite similar to what Craig was mentioning. I originally intended to play a Matasunder Guardian Vigil sort of wall deck, and I came into the tournament so brain dead that I was like, I'm never going to play a wall deck. This is just going to be stealth bleed. So
also cool. A little bit similar to Craig on the basis you had a few suddens in there too, from memory.
Yes, I have 7 suddens in the deck, I think.
There were a lot being played just in the over the whole day, not just the final.
Yeah, I think I was on the same table with Craig twice. So the final table and then one other one. And if you thought the number of suddens in the final table was bad, that wasn't bad. The other one, there was a sudden every turn at least. And I think at some point Craig was just cutting washes, which is kind of ridiculous. Yeah, so what's everyone's thought on the initial seeding? So this is I guess an interesting thing about finals tables for Vampire Eternal Struggle tournaments, where there's a final, there is a bit of a tactic and strategy around deciding where you want to seed. So where you want to seed doesn't determine who goes first, it doesn't determine your starting playing position. In terms of, well, whether you player 1, player 2, player 3, or so forth, but it does let you pick your predator and prey to a certain extent. I guess real quick summary for any of our viewers at home who aren't familiar with it. What happens is the fifth seed going into the finals will just be there, and then the fourth seed will be either his or her predator or prey. And then the third seed gets to pick whether he or she wants to seed between the two existing players, either to the left or the right of the fifth seed, and then the second seed and first seed. It sounds confusing. I promise it looks a lot easier when you're actually doing it, but yeah, that's generally it. So what it does is it gives higher seed players a bit of a bonus for doing well in the initial rounds of the tournament.
It's a big advantage. Like every victory point counts.
And I think also as well, it's a big difference between second seed and third seed in that equation as well. I think fourth and fifth seed, they're on the table. It's only
they're
third seed who really has a choice.
Yeah,
exactly. It's the third seed who makes a choice, but it's the second seed who has information about 3 other players. What I think often happens with the first seed is second seed has essentially boned them in some way or another, or they should do if they're doing it properly.
One of the many games within VtES.
So as third seed, why did you decide to pick me as prey? And I think at that point that would have been Stu as your predator, I think.
Yeah, so my the logic behind that was I wanted to be as far away from the shambling hordes as possible. So I figured if I sit behind you, that's one player, and I think most of the people figured because I was basically the only non-bleed deck on the table, and I figured somebody would sit behind me on that basis. And then that would put somebody between me and the shamblers, because combat's probably more of a nightmare than than anything else. But I was hopeful as like a bonus that Craig wouldn't sit behind me, because based on what I'd seen earlier, his deck was super fast. I kind of, my inclination was, well, he's not going to sit in front of me, probably sit behind me, but so it just seemed like the best play.
And then I think as the second seed, Shan was saying that because this was his, I didn't know this, but apparently this is his first finals table ever. So he wasn't, so again, congratulations for, first time in the finals. He wasn't quite sure how seeding sort of would work out in like the grand scheme of things. So he basically just decided to sit behind K, because, and this is kind of what you mentioned just now, Kay, is that you were basically the end of the flick chain, right? You didn't bleed, and you didn't pack the usual flick disciplines. So he figured that if there was a flick chain to be had, he'd rather his prey be the end of it. So yeah, that was why he chose where he decided to see. And Craig, coming in at first seed, why did you choose to seed where you decided to seed?
I knew we were all filth. Like, I knew it was stealth bleed. I'd seen I'd seen Key's votes go off, so I knew he could do big damage. So I had no idea what Stu's deck was, but from the rough description I got, I had the impression it would take the longest to get started. So I just thought, well, it sounds like a safe predator to have then. Out of a bunch of filth, has sounded the least filthy, basically.
Mine's at least slow filth.
So yeah, I knew it had dominate, but I hoped it would have enough jank in it so that it wouldn't just bleed me for 10 on turn 2.
That's it.
Yeah, apparently I was told during the tournament that dominate isn't good, or something.
And for what it's worth, when I sat down in the finals, the only person I played against was Nathaniel at that point, and he had been my predator, and he had shut my deck down. I mean, I had some bad card draw in that particular game, so when I looked over and realised I had the same situation, I was happy to be there, but I knew I wasn't going to last very long, just based on what I'd seen from his deck in the preliminary rounds.
Well, the good thing is you went into it knowing what to expect, because you've seen, it's stealth bleed field, right? How much variation can it be from game to game? From that sort of strategy around seeding, let's have a quick chat about what was the highlights of the final table, and maybe also if you can recall, what would you have done differently if you had the chance to go back and do it all over again. Let's shake things up a little bit, and let's start with Craig.
Well, I think sadly there were no real highlights. Like, my whole side of the table, we all
your lunatic eruption was pretty damn good.
So what we see here is looks like a lunatic eruption played on one of Shannon's vampire.
Yeah, that was a highlight.
Yeah, but I mean, in hindsight, it wasn't that well played, because I was shutting somebody down who was having a bad card draw and was already shut down.
It actually put me under a lot of pressure. Like, hands for one every round, and given that Shannon also plays combat, like, at the very start of the game, that's something you have to account for. Like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and if you're used to laning your minions down to 1 blood, all of a sudden that's
and
changing.
it's pretty sad that he threw a Entombment and a Arms of the Abyss in the bin before I slapped that on him.
Yep.
Like, it would have been lovely for me if he had those in his hand after I dropped the Lunatic Eruption.
Yeah, it would have been lovely for me as well. I would have left some pressure off, you know, all the deflections in the wall, and none of them does anything against votes, apparently.
Yeah. But no, like, as it turned out, the game on my side of the table seemed to be mainly driven by us all having bad draw, and spinning our wheels. So there's almost nothing I could have done differently, just because I did, you know, pretty well with the cards I had in hand. I just had a deck that has no lube.
Yeah,
like, there's no dreams, no barons, nothing like that. So if I get a bad draw, I get a bad draw, and I just have to deal.
I think that's something that Shan was mentioned. Well, he mentioned as well when I was talking to him about this roundtable, is that he also had a pretty bad. He was saying his hand was okay, in grand scheme of things, but his crypt was pretty terrible. He had 2 of I can't remember. He had 2 Julius.
Someone. Yeah, and two of Big Bart, I think.
Yeah, and 2 Bartholomew's, and he was saying that he needed Marconius or he didn't have. Did he have Julia? No, he had Quincy. He had Bartholomew and Quincy. So he was saying that he needed Julia and Marconius at least out early, just so that, you know, he could get the govern chain running, and that was
no superior dominate, right?
Yeah. Yep. So everyone else was just inferior dominate, and the Lunatic Eruption definitely didn't help.
I think he mentioned that he had 5 action cards and no stealth in his hand when I played that. So that's not a good way to be. I think that's why he didn't bother removing it, is because he must have assumed I would have stepped up and blocked it.
Well, he also couldn't. I think he didn't bring out Quincy for like 3 turns or something after you slapped the Lunatic Eruption as well.
He kept on rushing even after he had a second minion out, I believe. It took him a little while to get around to taking it off.
And he kind of also mentioned that all of that sort of got to his head, and he kind of forgot to ask his cross table to help remove the Lunatic Eruption, and
no one on the table removed it. I just
I mean, in my defense, I'm not 100%. I'm not very familiar with the card, and it was really far away from, like, the table was big, and I was like, okay, yeah. I kind of thought it was one of those cards that the vampire had to remove it just themselves or something, stupidly forgetting that if the mandatory action is to rush, then really it has to be someone else. But yeah, so 50% me being silly and 50% me just like, I probably should just read the card, asked to read the card instead of assuming what it does across the table.
I think you're too busy trying to get a victory point anyway, weren't you?
Well, that's a thing, right?
Yeah. Lead for A or remove a random card.
That was one of the things as well, is I had the same sort of problem as Shan, which was he couldn't govern down because he didn't have superior dominate. I couldn't govern down because I drew 0 govern the alliance the entire game. I didn't get a chance to do any of the govern shenanigans.
Throughout the day, like at the first round I was a bit rusty, second round tightened up, and then by the third round I was like technically sound. And then once the final hit, there was no technical errors. So I played everything correctly, zero mistakes, 0 technical errors. So my biggest thing sitting at that table, like the thing that I kept in my head the whole time was, don't be a threat. I'm the only vote deck on a table with 4 bleed decks. I actually had quite a big fear of if I look like the threat, Craig potentially bleeding me cross table because of obviously the demontation bleed. So my biggest thing was don't be a threat, just quiet, talk as little as possible to leak as little information as possible, and just go into my shell and just technically do everything that I needed to do. And that's why like my hand was full of filth, and I just call one kind a turn, or play a condemnation moot, or just tick along, try to let the table breathe, and not look too scary. That was my main thing. In terms of highlights, there was a point where I got rushed by Shan, and I think he had Earth Swords or Entombment in his hand, and I had Unleashed Hell's Fury in play, and I did like a little pre-combat negotiation.
I don't want to use Unleashed Hell's Fury. At this stage, I don't care. No, I do. Just the next one. This is where the hilarity comes in, isn't it?
And he went for that, and I think that would have changed the game massively if he had continued the rush. Either I used Unleashed Hell's Fury or he continued the rush and lied. I think that that would have changed the game a lot. And then I think for me the most important turn was the turn that I bled for one twice. That was that kind of defined the game for me. Like if it wasn't for that turn, the game could have swung in either direction. And that's actually one of the talking about ham jams a lot. So the deck that I played is not meant to bleed. So it just doesn't take bleed actions typically, unless like that one scenario. It does have like 2 boost bleed cards, but they're like the monkey wrench, and they're just like a surprise. But the idea being is, well, if you don't bleed, then people's hands get blocked with wakes and deflections. And if you do that for the whole game, and people will often take a bleed of 1 expecting a bleed of 4, and they'll save the bounce of that. So that's pretty much the summary of the game, I guess.
Yeah. But so, Craig, would you have bled across the table if he was at any point looking like he was throwing reckless agitations all over the place?
I didn't get the opportunity. I have 17 Kindred Spirits in the deck, and I pulled 3. Yeah, and Shan and Stu seem to be equally jammed, so Key could have done anything and we would have played our game the same way, because my game was ass. So like I think laying low was a good idea, but that's because he didn't realize how fucked I was.
Yeah, I think whenever somebody goes into a finals a top seed, and then you've sort of seen how fast they can act in earlier games, you kind of think that's the worst that they can do. It's like you having seen my vote deck fire, you had that in mind when you sat down at the table. Well, when I sat down at the table, I had, he can bleed for 3 or 4 every turn with every guy. So yeah, it's funny how like the previous rounds linger in people's mind, and they take it into the final.
It's like Stu was holding his hordes ready to go backwards. Like he knew what's coming.
Yeah, so the issue is I had, I think, 1 horde in my hand early on, and then that was it. And it took me so long before I could get the second one. I've got 10 Emberling hordes and maybe 4 other allies, I want to say, 4 or 5. So theoretically I should have seen a little bit more, but on the basis I'd seen how fast Nathaniel's deck was, I was more cautious in bringing my minions out. I didn't want to drain my pool unnecessarily. And off the back of that, then probably wasn't taking as many actions on the basis that Craig wasn't really blocking anything anyway. I didn't have much card flow. It took me a long time to draw one of my 3 dreams, I think, and I think I had 1 or 2 liquidations, but didn't see those either. So I was.
Did you get a liquidation sudden?
No, I got Path of Bone, and I think I want to say like a Blood Doll or something else. I can't recall, but essentially anything to do with, well, most things to do with pool management or blood management, I think I got hosed on.
There was a turn where I said, "Hey, you forgot your transfers," and you're like, "Oh no!" But the reality was you didn't forget them.
that was pretty early on, and at that point I was hoping, you know what, I want to pay this via Governs instead. You know, I wanted to see if I can get it. I had one person out with Spiridom. Let's see whether or not I can just do this via Governs as opposed to paying for it. In retrospect, I probably actually should have taken that transfer phase instead, because I didn't draw the Governs, or I didn't draw enough of them.
You got 2 minions out, right? You got 2 minions with 2 Governs.
Yeah, it's decent. It was decent. Probably the other thing I was thinking of is I have Andrea Giovanni, so +1 stealth and necromancy actions, so he's pretty central. I had 2 copies of Lead-In, so who I always love as a minion. Wasn't central to the deck, but he'd been played in most of the previous rounds. I just got lucky enough to get him out. Yeah, I know. And then I didn't get him in my opening crypt. And so I was thinking to myself, there is no chance I have of randomly pulling him if I do a pay for 1, you know, transfers and pay 1 to try and get him. But it was only after I didn't get him that I realised actually how central to my deck and to my success in the previous rounds he'd been.
When you did finally, you pulled a Dreams and tapped it, and I thought, oh, here we go.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping too.
So, what did you actually pull? Did you pull all your Shamblers then?
No, I think I'd just gotten my first Shamblers out, and what I was hoping for was that I'd pull a couple more, be able to ditch them pretty quickly, and be able to get a second Shamblers out. As it was, I pulled, I think, a Govern and a bit of Stealth, and that's great, but actually that's not what I needed at the time. It wasn't enough to move forward against you, particularly on the basis that I figured you'd had more than enough time to save up the deflections. So I was hoping for a little bit more than what I got, but you know, it just arrived a little bit too late. But I think one of the other things going into it is I'd seen a bit of casual combat in earlier rounds. I didn't realise how little combat actually was on the table because I'd only played against Nathaniel's deck. And I think if I had figured out how few combat cards people were playing, then would have actually ditched a whole bunch of bleed mods and such like that I had in my hand and would have just pulled for the Shamblers.
Were there any highlights to your game though?
For my game, honestly, it wasn't actually binning your vampire as much fun as that was, because I knew at that point that it was just to slow you down and that you were about to die. But it was a choice of whether or not I was going to die to Key or die to you. I don't think I really had a highlight to the game, honestly, and that's not to say it wasn't a good game, but it was just like to find myself in a point where I can negotiate with people and where I can suggest something and just a little stone at the top of a hill. Next thing you know, 5 turns later it becomes an avalanche that wipes out someone else, preferably not me. And I never found that in this table. There was never that point where you have the conversation with someone and then the game goes in a different direction. Everyone sat down and everyone really only went forward. And there was no real other choice for them to do anything except to go forward.
So not talking denied your superpower. That's what you're saying.
You somehow played Condemnation Mute on me. But it's true because so often when you get to a final table, everything gets stripped away, right? And everyone gets focused on if I can just get the 1 VP, then that puts me in front of everyone else. Then I just need to hang on to it to get to time or whatever it might be. So finals often have a different dynamic than qualifying rounds. In a qualifying round, you can play around a little bit more with it because people are thinking about the game win a little bit more, and they're almost pivoting or negotiating to that 2.5 VP as opposed to the 1 VP.
Well, you go double or nothing in
That's
a
it.
preliminary. Like better to take a chance at a table sweep.
Yeah, so
And
because
maybe get nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And so because of that dynamic, I think that I play better in qualifying rounds than I play in finals because my powers of basic presence don't work on people when it comes to that. And I've got to say, Nathaniel really often is not a person who's good to deal with that because you, Nathaniel, you just go, no, I'm playing my game, I'm going forward, that's what I'm going to do. And that gets you to the finals table. So, you know, kudos to you. Yeah, my Jedi mind tricks don't work on you.
Well, to be fair, it kind of changes for me depending on what deck I'm playing, but with a deck that's just dominate go burr, it's really there's really not much you can negotiate for me to do. I can't rush backwards. And at the end of the tournament, I finally sat down to have a look at what was actually inside my deck. And
then I hope you had a good long shower afterwards.
Yeah, there was no combat. There was no, it was just straight up filth end to end. The only, I guess, entertaining bit of the deck was the Curse of Nitrosis. Because that was the only thing that wasn't just straight up dominate. You had to actually figure out how you want to play it and where you want to play it. And those
Good card.
I really like the fact they reprinted that card too to show it to a new audience as well, because it's one of those ones that you didn't often see past the first couple of releases because it was too odd.
Yeah,
you need to wrap your head around it, and and if you don't pay attention, you can easily misplay it, and it backfires. But in this table, it did 2 pull damage, one to Stu, and then it gave Craig the oust. It was the extra pull that Craig needed to oust Shan. So it's really really powerful card, providing you read it and understand it before you play it.
Yeah, that was one of the things with the commentary that was going on in the finals table. When I played the card, I think there were a few questions as to why I was playing it on myself, and I took the card back to read it out to the table. But because of the way the camera angle was, it kind of looked like it got sudden, but I wasn't happy with being sudden, and I was just being petty and refusing to let the game keep going.
Oh, we didn't shake your hand either, so...
Oh, yeah.
Hey, do you notice the second, it's like when you have your first kid, everybody gets very excited and we all shake hands, it's all very exciting. Second oust?
Yeah, nobody shakes hands anymore. It looks so...
What about a cross-table fist bump? No, poor Nathaniel. Where's his respect?
Nobody's shaking his hand.
That was...
There was a handshake.
Handshakegate.
Handshakegate, yeah.
What did you guys think about? Because this was the first final that I played where they cleared the room, so the entire room was cleared. We had a whole room to ourselves, and then there was a camera set up. What did you guys think of that?
Let's hear it from Craig. Did you notice any difference?
I wasn't nervous at all in the game. I felt very relaxed, and I'm not sure if it's because there were no other people looking over my shoulder or because I had no choices, so there's nothing to be tense about. Like normally in a high stakes game, I get I sort of worry, am I hanging on to the wrong card? Am I doing the right thing? But in this case, I was, just chill.
You're saying there were no stakes?
Because I had...
It's like a level of zen that you need to really get to.
You'll pay a lot of money for that.
Yes, I'm not sure whether my calmness was because it felt like a casual game because there were no unlockers, or because my hand draw was so bad that I didn't really have any options, so I just played the game that was put in front of me.
So, yeah, Stu, did it feel any different for you considering you've been on a number of finals by this time?
Don't think so. Because honestly, I find that when you're on the table that counts, you're not paying attention to anything beyond that table. At least I don't feel like could have been people behind us watching, and I wouldn't have noticed either way.
I've got a bit of a weird perspective on this, and I think it's also because I've started doing videos for VtES and all that jazz. I actually, during the final table, it was actually in the back of my head that I knew this was being broadcast. I knew there was an audience, and I think the fact that I'm very used to by now talking to a camera plus, a couple of friends on screen, but not an actual audience, but then also having to address the fourth wall and having to think about the fact that there is an audience out there. It actually didn't feel like there wasn't an audience. If that sounds weird.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. No, I when I played things, look, I've watched a few tables of other tournaments and decided I don't really like watching VtES games because there is minimal table chatter, it seems like, and there's I don't know, I'm not a cricket fan, but it feels like watching Test cricket where there's days of nothing happening and then all of a sudden everyone cheers and you go, oh God, what was that? Something happened that was really phenomenal and game-changing, but you almost don't notice it. I took photos of my table a few times during the day in earlier games, and I'm like, I've been playing this game for 45 minutes. I have 5 cards in front of me, but like, it's meaningful that I have those 5 cards in front of me. But it's VtES is often a game of these little small increments. So I tried to, when I was being filmed, trying to make sure my cards were obvious and trying to make sure I was playing clearly as opposed to mumbling a little bit or pointing in a way which people might not have seen. But beyond that, I felt like I was being watched, but it didn't interfere with the game, I suppose.
I think with like I said, I went into that final intending to keep my mouth shut and not draw any attention to myself. Normally in other games I'd be like, oh hey, blah 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 blah, but in that game specifically I was like, nah, I ain't saying anything I don't have to
I stay very still, they won't notice me.
Yeah, completely. Even like my seating position, I'll sit back there and just like that. And so I wasn't going to add to that chatter because I figured there was not going to be any good that came out of it. If there was another vote deck on the table or a combat deck that got off to a quick start, I think I would have started to talk a lot more then, and I think other players probably would have engaged in that. But yeah, that final in particular, there was little deals to be made. Everybody was doing their thing, and nobody could really interfere with their thing that much. Right? So, and I think that also resulted in like the speed. It was very
an hour.
Yeah, it was very business orientated. It was like bang, bang, bang. Okay, all very technically tight by everybody. Very little sloppy play, which was good to see. Yeah, I think that made a difference.
Well, there was very little wank in my deck. I think 2 leather jackets was the extent of it, and I didn't pull either of them, so every action was a bleed or a lunatic eruption.
How many lunatic eruptions are you playing in that deck?
Just one. I just managed to pull it straight up in several games, so it had an outsized effect.
Because I'd seen it played in 2 games, and I figured, oh, you built a lunatic eruption deck. That's great. This is awesome. I'm going to build one of those. This is a great idea.
Yeah. The reason I haven't built one is because I don't own enough copies.
Yeah.
I had a
Yeah,
Lunatic Eruption deck get to 6th place before, but never managed to make it to a final table with Lunatic Eruption in a deck list. So, kudos.
There we go. You're the first person in Australia and New Zealand, at least, to bring a Lunatic Eruption to the final table.
Maybe.
Yeah, viewers at home who are statisticians or people who are really across the history of VtES, yeah, get in the comments. Tell me I'm wrong.
Going back to the empty room thing, I really liked it. It was kind of like I could just focus. I didn't have to worry about people looking over my back, hearing little whispers or chats in the background, and because like at final table, like I'm tuned into all of that because you never know what little bit of information you might glean from it, right? And it's just all your senses are kind of like. So I don't do I don't completely zone out on the game. Like everything's, and if somebody like just walks past me, like I'm aware of them, and it's off-putting. So I really enjoyed it. So I think it had a very different vibe. Like I'm used to playing online. Well, I used to play on Lackey all the time. It felt like it had some of the benefits of Lackey, like no distractions, but it still had the positives of social engagement and actually being there. So I think it took away from some of the scale of the event, like past finals where you had lots of people watching. But I think it's probably better for the game overall, for the actual game that took place. I think it's a way better way to run them.
So I had a chat with some of the spectators. So what happened during our game was that Andy actually ran the feed up onto a pretty large television in another room, and I was having a chat with some of the spectators after the game, and they actually said that they really liked the way it was done in the end, because they could watch the game. Granted, because we had some technical issues with getting audio from the table itself, they didn't get the table talk, but they could get excited with the players. It's basically like in any sports arena, you can shout at the players and say, "Hey, that's stupid! Well, why did you do that?" And they're like, "Finally, this is the first time I can do it in the finals. I could never do it before."
Yeah.
Funny thing was I was listening to the commentary later on, and I realised I must have leant forward at one point, and everyone got really excited apparently on the commentary track because they thought, something's going to happen, and I was just leaning forward at the time. Lean forward more often.
Look how excited he is. He's got the dreams. He's going for the oust.
For me, my reflections on that, and it's a terrible thing, when I sat down and I looked at my seeding, knowing what I'd seen Nathaniel's deck do before, I wasn't sure how I was going to get my VP. Craig, I hadn't seen your deck, but I know that you are particularly very good at pool management and very good at blood management. And even you playing a sub-together deck is still better than 25% of the people I play against. So I was happy to be there. As I said, I sort of won the coin toss to be there, but I wasn't very hopeful for my chances, which is probably not a great way of starting. But I was thinking that my only chance to get Craig was you, Craig, to slightly overextend yourself, trying to get Shan out, and that never really happened because Shan never got his engine going in the first place, so you didn't need to get to that point of overextension. So I did have a handful of bleed at many times. I did have stealth here and there, but it was never going to be enough with the wall of minions that you had up, and what I felt was probably a wall of flick that would just push it straight through across to Shan.
How long did it take for you to get a minion with superior Auspex, Craig?
Honestly, I can't remember. I know the first guy I got out was just a Wiener with basic, But I do remember when I got the first big eyeball out. When Stu died, I was holding 3 telepathic misdirections, but no wakes. So I had one flicker, but the second bleed would have gone through. I think I was also holding one the obfuscate card that provides a maneuver or stealth, because I was expecting, or kind of expecting a Shambler Rush as well. So a very defensive hand.
That's why Stu needed to die when he died.
Yeah. Me pulling out the Shamblers was, on reflection, perhaps one of the things that sped the game up a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think once you sort of got below 10 pull, whether you had a Shamblers or not, at that point I needed to act. I mean, how confident were you, Nathaniel, on 5 pull on your turn?
Not at all. I basically was fishing on that turn, the turn before my last, my last turn before I got ousted. I was basically desperately fishing for the 2 copies of Delaying Tactics that I knew in the deck somewhere, and hope that was enough, because you had 3 minions. I knew you had Reckless Agitations, but I think we've all sort of mentioned this, alluded to this during this conversation, which was that none of us really had a alternate game plan. I think Stu and Key, both of your decks were probably the most likely to have an actual alternate game plan, and then Craig maybe could have did shenanigans with cross table kindred spirits and all that. But with what I had, there was no alternate game plan. And not drawing governs meant that I just had to throw everything at Stu, hope that that was enough, and it wasn't. So yeah, there wasn't much more I could do. Song of Pan really doesn't work when you only have 1 minion. I mean, we've all sort of played this game for years now, and you know how it is, especially at tournaments. Stealth Bleed gets you VPs, gets you game wins, gets you to the final table, but Stealth Bleed always typically tends to struggle at the final table when you can't negotiate too much, and people generally know what your deck does, so they plan for it. Yeah.
That's actually the reason why. So I was choosing, my choice was between Platinum Protocol Bleed deck and the Vote deck. And I went for the Vote deck because I wanted to have table presence. And that was the decision point. Having some table presence, because I've been in the position before when, my deck can do the thing, but that can't change a bad scenario. That can't influence people. That can't rush a problematic player who's about to sweep. There's not having that. I really wanted to have table presence, and that was my decision point.
So before we started the video, we were talking a little bit about tempo and that point in the game which everything hangs on. And I think that Vote decks are really good at disrupting that for some other players, because you can just throw that KRC or Reckless Agitation cross table, and then all of a sudden that deck that was going to surge forward now has to reconsider. It's a bit like a Rush deck can also do that, or in some cases a Kindred Spirits deck too, in its own way. I think that was a good choice.
In the third round, I did 11 pull damage to my Predator and backousted them because they were.
Was that Craig?
No. It was. Was it Richard? He was playing a Misaki Rush deck, and then he had 3 minions with built-in rushes, so he had to die.
Was Rich, yeah.
But if I had if I was playing a Stealth Lead deck or anything, I would have no say of that, and I'd just get smashed in the face. So yeah, and that's 11 pull damage. Because a Reckless and 2 kinds backwards, And so that having that table presence, and I think actually going into most tournaments now, I think that's going to be like my rule of thumb. To at least, like, I like Lunatic Eruption, that counts as table presence, but at least having something that you can just sort of use to poke a stick, or use to I think that's going to be like my baseline for picking a deck. And it's just more fun as well, being able to engage with people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Harder though, like, yeah, takes more brain power. Like a stealth bleed deck you can play even if you're hungover.
I like that that's your rule.
Or something that's
Spirits has got table presence like that. Like I said, that was a consideration. I was worried that if I got too strong or looked too scary, I'd get bleed across table. And I think that Kindred Spirits is probably one of the few lead decks where you've got that as an option, and I think that's like.
Yep, I did backcast on the third table, my second VP, second game win.
So, what was your reasoning for backcasting?
I had a rush prey, and I made a deal with them to not go forward, and I really needed to generate some pool. So the only way I could generate pool was by bleeding somebody. So I then made a deal with my cross-table buddy that if I ousted their prey, they would give me a turn of amnesty. And they agreed, and it ended up working out very well for me.
So you
just need to go home and wash. This is terrible.
Yeah, it was a total dog act for my predator. That done nothing to deserve it, but it worked for me, so hooray.
So just to clarify, you were going to bleed him anyway, but you managed to get a free turn out of it as well.
Bingo! I got a deal out of it.
Nice.
People say I do shenanigans.
Oh, and also, I might have played the stuff at inferior just to get the blood, but because I got a deal out of it, I played them. I pumped the bleeds as much as I could.
And you feel good about yourself?
Well, you know, a game win's a game win.
Yeah. All right. So before we sort of wrap up, I guess just a quick go around table. Any final thoughts on what happened for the tournament, or the final table, or any sage advice to give any new VtES players or players who've been trying to get into the finals table for a while but haven't been able to?
For me, it was just a reflection actually on how much I enjoy playing the game, and I hope I would still say that if I didn't score as many VPs as I did on the day, if that makes any sense. Like, I hope I'm not just feeling good about the game just because I went pretty well, and I went well on the Sunday too. But I'm not an online player. I haven't got into Lucky or Tabletop Simulator or anything like that, and so it's really the first time I've played beyond the new V5 cards with newbies since 2019. So for me, it was about just trying to get back on the bike and realising that I've got enough muscle memory from playing it most years since 1994 that I've managed to internalise enough of it and not get too spooked. I think one of the components I had going into it was really conscious that the meta had changed so much, and I was probably going up against people who'd played a lot of stuff online, judging from the chat that I saw leading up to it. And I mean, last time I played Legionnaires as a deck archetype was not really yet a thing. They'd been released in 2019, but they weren't such a dominant presence. Didn't see a single Legionnaires deck. I think I was, beyond your Nocturnes, Nathaniel, I was pretty much the only ally deck as well from what I saw. And so I guess my reflection for newer players would be just make a deck which you want to play for starters, to Key's point before, but also make a deck you want to play, and make a deck which isn't trying to solve the problems of the 100 other decks that you come across. Play a deck that you want to play, that you're going to enjoy playing, and that you actually think can reliably oust. Because nothing worse than being ousted first on a table, 3 games in a row, So try and give yourself a bit of staying power. But that's it for me.
Yeah, I think it was really good to travel again. Obviously, first time leaving the country since COVID. Seeing everybody's. I mean, that it kind of made me realize it's just like a nice wake up call that this community matters and the people matter, and it's like up till COVID it was like an annual event. So I'm looking forward to just keeping that going. In terms of like gameplay and games, I think something that a lot of people do is just focus on that VP and getting that VP, but actually it's all about the game win. And that goes for making the finals, getting a good seating position, and then obviously winning the final. So like, it's real easy to get, oh, I can take a VP, but when you oust somebody, you need to consider, are you in a better or a worse position when you oust them? And like if I had in the final, it happened multiple times throughout the day, but in the final particularly, if I had ousted Nathaniel when I could, which was maybe one or possibly even 2 turns earlier, that I would have been in a real bad position because I would have been getting smashed in the face by Shamblers. Stu would have been on like 15 pull, 10 to 50 or something like that, and I would have run out of steam, and then Craig would have come around, and yeah. So I think that's a really important thing. Just before you oust somebody, just work out if it's good or bad to do so. I think it's a real hard thing to learn because like 6 pull a VP, wow, especially if you're just new to the game, but it's about the game win. And I've even seen players like get 2 VPs in a 4-player table, and I'm like, well, that's not a game win. That's not good. It doesn't help you know. So I think focusing on the game win and playing what you want to play. I think it's better experience all around.
I have a very solid +1 for that observation. Like I think Key called it perfectly in deciding that if he got a VP earlier, he would have been rooting himself. I reckon that's a super accurate call.
The perfect technical description, rooting myself.
Coming into the tournament, I had the opposite experience to Stu in that I've been playing loads of Tabletop Simulator and loving it because I'm massively disorganized and I find building decks is really hard. So my decks tend to be really toolboxy because I find the first card that works rather than the best card.
Nice.
I haven't bought cards in ages. And I actually got really excited because I was doing well and bought shitloads of cards. So I enjoyed the game, partly because it was nice to be playing face-to-face again, and partly because I was winning and I was going, hey, yeah, this game's great, I'm winning this shit. And then I bought cards so that I could build some of my jank Tabletop Simulator decks in real life.
Right, so friendly local game store owners out there, if you stock VtES, apparently the way to get people to buy cards is to let them win. Treat us all as Wookiees. We're all just Wookiees.
I'm not ashamed of my inner child. It's just like.
And I've got to say, and shout out to Andy. I mean, Andy has built a shrine to VtES in that place. So, the fact that you can go in and there are literally tables upon tables of singles to purchase. You can grab exactly what you need, and then you can go in and go, oh, here's original art from VtES, here is this from VtES, here's that, and yeah, it's great. So fantastic setup, and so kudos to him for everything he's done there. Venue.
I think whatever you've all sort of covered as well, whatever Shan had to say. So he also mentioned that it was great fun to be out after 2 years of being having to not be able to play face-to-face due to COVID. And he kind of also mentioned that the entire event felt a lot more relaxed. I guess you could put it down to people just being happy to be getting some face-to-face games in after a long time, or it could just be we've all matured in the 2 years. One of the two or both. Take it however you want. And thank you very much again, Stu, Key, and Craig for coming on to this video today, and also Shan for taking time to answer the questions even though he couldn't make it. Yeah, a huge round of applause for Key. Congratulations for winning final table and this is second or third time the New Zealand Australian Continental Championship.
Yes, second for the Continental Championships.
And you won the next day too.
Aha, yeah.
Due to some great, graceful players, and I'd like to thank you guys. I wouldn't have been able to win that final if you weren't there. Thanks very much.
Yeah, it was great fun to play with everyone again, and before I let everyone go, here's the usual spiel. If you like this video, remember to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, put something in the comments below. Helps me. Yeah, you know the deal. You've watched all a bunch of YouTube chat videos. You know how this goes. And yeah, until next time. See ya.
Yeah.